Hello and welcome to the 78th episode of NEOHUMAN podcast. I'm Agah Bahari, etagologist on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow this show on liveinlimbo.com, iTunes, YouTube, BitChute, and soon on Spotify. And today with me, I have Rana Kaliouby. Welcome to NEOHUMAN podcast, Rana.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Let's start with your background, the work you've done, the lives you've lived, and what are you mainly focused on now these days?
Well, I am co-founder and CEO of an MIT startup called Affectiva, and we are on a mission to humanize technology by building artificial emotional intelligence. So I can say a little bit more about that. But also, I just launched my book, Girl Decoded, and it's a memoir. So it's an intertwining of my personal story and the story of the technology I've built.
Are you originally from Egypt?
That's right. I was born in Egypt. I'm Egyptian American now, Egyptian American. But then I also grew up in Kuwait and Abu Dhabi.
How old were you when you left the region?
I was born in Cairo, and then we were in Kuwait until the first Gulf War. So I was about 10 when we had to evacuate our home there. And then I was in Abu Dhabi until I finished high school, studied computer science at the American University in Cairo, and then moved to Cambridge University at about 19 years old. And I've been back and forth a lot since then.
Yeah, the reason I ask, because it's very important, I think, to have the perspective about that, those kind of societies with respect to technology and artificial intelligence and governance and all of that. And I want to talk to you about all of that in the next, hopefully, an hour, maybe a little more. But let's start with your book. The book is called Girl Decoded, The Scientist's Quest to Reclaim Our Humanity by Bringing Emotional Intelligence to Technology. What made you write a book, and what the book is all about, and what are you trying to express mainly to the audience?
I would say I initially wanted to write the book because I wanted to really tell the world about emotion AI and what are the applications of it and what are the ethical and moral implications. But as I started writing the book, I also realized that my own path to coming to this is really unique, and I had to overcome a lot of cultural and societal norms and find my own voice. So I really wanted to be a story about humanity and just kind of an inspirational story for everybody out there that's trying to figure out their own career and kind of sense of purpose.
What made you interested in artificial intelligence?
You know, it was really kind of this realization that technology changes the way we connect as humans. So it's a very human story. It's not about the technology. It's really about how we connect and communicate. And when I first got to Cambridge University for my PhD, I realized I was spending so much time on my device, like all of us do, yet this machine had absolutely no clue how I was feeling. And even worse, it was the main device I used to communicate with my family back home, because international calls were and still are very expensive.
Yeah.
And I realized that a lot of the richness of, I come from the Middle East, so we're very emotive and very expressive. And I felt like all of the richness of this nonverbal communication kind of disappeared in cyberspace. And that got me, I started asking a question, like, what if machines could understand human emotions just like we do? And that was 20 years ago. So I've been on this journey for the past 20 years trying to build that.
I was looking forward to talk to you because I've talked to a number of people in the field of AI, but every single one of them have been with respect to thinking side of our brain and thinking side of, the society. The emotional AI, it was the first time that I heard about it. And it's actually pretty consistent because IQ I knew about since I was maybe 4, 3, 5, something like that. But EQ I learned about, which is emotional intelligence, in my 20s. So what is the definition of emotional AI, and what are the implications of it?
Yeah, let's start with humans. You're absolutely right. So if you look at the research in the past, like 60, 70 years, our IQ matters, your cognitive intelligence matters, but actually your emotional intelligence matters just as much in day-to-day life. So people who have higher EQs, which is your emotional quotient, your ability to read and understand and adapt to other people's emotions, they tend to be more likable. they're more persuasive, they're better managers, they have more successful professional and personal lives. And I believe that that's true for technology as well, especially technology that is mainstream and interacts with us on a daily basis. So you're right, a lot of the focus on AI is about automation and being more efficient and more productive. Okay, but what about it being more humane and helping us be more human and more empathetic and more connected with each other, which are very important parts of life as well. And so that's been my focus, to try and bring that EQ element into AI.
Mm-hmm. There's also the element of automation with respect to emotional AI as well, right? Let me just read because some people watch this, some people will listen to it. This is a description of emotion measurement technology, that is a technology that your company pursues, and says, effective as technology enables software application to use a webcam to track a user's smirks, smiles, frowns, and furrows, which measures a user's level of surprise, amusement, or confusion. The technology also allows a person's heart rate to be measured from a webcam without the person wearing a sensor. So a lot of positive application, but I'm sure a lot of people are freaked out about it too, because we are dealing with text-based and image-based and video-based kind of social media and content creation at this point, and everybody's losing their mind at how these data is being collected, who owns it, and all the biases that exist about, interpreting those data. So I would imagine, like, how is this going to affect everyday kind of a person if you can look at it from purely a user base, because this is a technology that you guys, I believe, are licensing to different companies.
Kind of. I could talk about the applications.
Okay, let's start with that, and then I want to talk about in the societal scale, because it's not only going to be webcam. It's going to be, if there is a surveillance camera on the street, this will be a technology that will be used there for good reasons and also negative reasons, because it's a tool, right? It depends on human intention how they want to use it.
Right. Yes, and I feel very passionately about that. And we as a company have drawn a very clear line on where we want to see this technology being used and where we will just not license the technology or build products for industries. So I want to start with the positives first.
Yes.
And because I really do think, I'm biased because I'm passionate about this, but I really do think there are real transformative use cases for this technology. As a company, we're very focused on the automotive industry, where, if you have a sensor in the vehicle that can detect signs of distraction or signs of drowsiness, levels of drowsiness, if you are moderately drowsy or severely drowsy or even asleep. We've seen examples of people like literally driving while they're asleep. Well, the car can take action. The car can alert you. It can even take more aggressive action, like, if it's a Tesla, for example, and it has semi-autonomous capabilities, it can say, well, you know what, I'm going to be a better driver than you are right now because you're so tired. I'm taking over control. So I think this kind of human-machine partnership, especially in the context of automotive, can really increase the safety of our roads. Another example is we now have child seat detectors, and we can detect if there are children left behind in the car. This doesn't happen a lot, but when it happens, it's obviously horrific for the parents, because often these children just die of heat in the vehicle. So that's another example where technology can act as the ears and eyes inside the car. So that's one use case. Another amazing use case.
Also animals when they're being left in a car.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's another one too. Exactly. Another one which I'm very passionate about is the whole area of health, and especially mental health. We did a lot of work in autism. It was the first project. It was actually the project that brought me over to the United States. So we were building like a Google Glass-like device that can give real-time feedback to kids on the autism spectrum about like nonverbal signals and making face and eye contact. We also have people who are looking into like early signs of Parkinson's. You can use this to detect stress, anxiety, depression. So there's really a lot of potential. I'm not saying we're there yet. There needs to be a lot more work to be done, but we're in front of our machines all the time. So that could be an opportunity to really understand your baseline And if we start seeing a deviation from that, we can flag that to you or a family member or a clinician. So that's another area where it can be really transformative.
So what you said with respect to cars sounds like that it can be used as a bridge to full autonomy, because by the time that cars can drive themselves, it's whatever state the driver is in, it doesn't really matter because the car is in charge. But I don't know how far we are away from that, but again, the issue of privacy, which I think we have to really move on beyond the conventional definition of privacy, that it's non-existent at this point, because a lot of data is being collected, but it's just a matter of who's collecting them, how are they using them. And also very important, I think, is that why aren't users getting paid for the data that they're generating?
I hear you. I'm absolutely on the same page with you. So when we first started the company, my co-founder, who's an MIT professor, Rosalind Picard, and I kind of sat around her kitchen table and we were like, okay, there are so many applications of this technology. What are we going to say yes to and what are we going to say no to? And we decided on a set of core values to help us make these decisions. So one is respecting that this is very personal data. And so everything we do on a consent and opt-in basis. So any application where people don't know that they're being recorded or they're being kind of tracked, then we basically decline that. And that has implications on surveillance, for example. We never do anything in the surveillance or security or lie detection space because usually people or consumers don't really know. They might know that the cameras are there, but they don't really know how it's being used. The second is this transparency around usage. I mean, even now with all of our devices, you get these long, like 5-page agreements and you just click I agree.
Yeah, nobody reads them.
Nobody reads them because they're too complicated and they're not transparent. And we're big advocates of just a very clear, plain English consenting form. We're going to turn on the camera. Here's how we're going to use the data. Here's what you're getting in return for it. I think we need more tech companies to kind of adopt that approach. And then the third is what we're calling power asymmetry. If you look around, a small number of companies and governments have access to the majority of the data. There's this power asymmetry. And I think we need to rebalance that, to your point. Like, if I'm going to give up such personal data, like, what am I getting in return for it? And I think it could be monetary, it could be other types of value, but we need to rebalance the power here.
Yeah, the reason I'm talking about the monetary aspect of it is because we're talking a lot right now about how a lot of jobs are not going to come back, like 40% of a job, supposedly. And people are talking about universal basic income and how we can. And I'm like, we are becoming our own careers just by generating data, because these companies are collecting data. They're becoming trillionaires. And users, they're not only they don't own their data, they're not getting anything in return. So you might, once in a while get like $1,200 check in the mail, which is just laughable. And think about, hey, how am I going to? And it just seems like this process of automation and digitization, it's not going to stop with where are we right now? Because at some point, we're talking about emotional AI right now. But what will happen when we have, at some point, nanobots monitoring inside of our body for all the good reasons, right?
Right.
But we becoming this data generators I don't want to misuse the term, but it really can suggest that at some point, if there will be very few people at the top with these massive corporations and companies, you will be slave data generators who are creating a lot of opportunities and a lot of wealth for very few people, and you get nothing in return. So it's a big concern aside from the privacy aspect of it.
Yes, I agree with that. And there has to be a different data model, a monetization and model here, business model, right? One of the reasons I wrote the book is I really wanted the consumer, the average consumer, to be part of this conversation. Often what you find is, because AI is such a black box and a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions around what it is, how does it work, then the average consumer is not part of this dialogue. And I think as this evolves in terms of ethics and business models and who owns the data, all of these dialogues, I think we need everybody around the table to ensure that it works for all of us.
What are your thoughts on decentralization of data using blockchain?
I think that is very interesting. I haven't seen it done in our space, so there's probably actually some potential for innovation there. But I do think that is interesting.
Yeah, because the concept of trust itself, it seems like it's not really reliable to say, well, we don't trust this CEO, let's replace him with another CEO, right? It's just that transparency and the community owning the data that is being shared on a decentralized basis seems like a more viable kind of an approach rather than relying on any specific kind of individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the book is called Girl Decoded, A Scientist's Quest to Reclaim Our Humanity by Bringing Emotional Intelligence to a Technology. What are some of the elements of humanizing machines and technology from your perspective that needs to be taken in a very solid kind of a steps moving into this crazy decade that is ahead of us?
I think there's a few things. So first of all, it's this kind of going back to this idea that we need to marry IQ and EQ in all of our technology platforms and take a very human-centered approach to designing this. So and to designing, building, and deploying it, right? For me, when we sit around the table and design, like, what is the next version of a conversational agent going to look like? It can't just be about the transactional function of that device. It has to also include the human elements. And I think that's really important. And then I really, if you kind of dissect how people communicate, only 10% of our, the way we communicate is in the choice of words we use. 90% is nonverbal, and it's split kind of equally between your facial expressions, your hand gestures, and your vocal intonations. So I think, and especially now that we are connecting, with this pandemic, a lot of our communication is becoming virtual, whether, in the way we conduct business or in the way kids are learning or even patient doctors are connecting. I think we're going to see a layer of innovation that incorporates emotion AI to quantify these nonverbal signals. And then you can draw all sorts of really interesting insights. One example actually two examples, if you don't mind, because I feel very passionate about those. I've had to pivot away from what you would expect a book tour to look like. And I've been doing these virtual book events. And these typically involve, I'm giving a Zoom or a live stream to hundreds of people and I can't see any of them. And it's so hard because you can't really riff off their energy the way you would in a live auditorium. But I imagine if emotion AI was integrated, you could get real-time feedback. I could just aggregate everybody's emotional engagement and I could see if they find what I say interesting. Are they engaged? Are they totally confused? Are they bored to death? So I think that's one area that's really powerful. And then how we connect with our teams, right? Like I have a global team, and now that we're all kind of dispersed and working from home, I just keep wondering, is the team engaged? Are they committed? Are they stressed? And I just want to know, because then I can be proactive as a leader. So I miss that.
That's fascinating. I'm just thinking, as a speaker, you can wear a glass and become a forensic psychologist, a public speaking guru, and it gives you real-time data that you can tweak yourself according to that. And then the question would be, what would be the difference between human response and this information and data that is being collected and presented to humans by machines, right? Because that's one of the arguments that Elon Musk is making for Neuralink, that our biggest disconnect with the machines is the rate of input.
That's so interesting. Huh. That's a very big consideration. For example, we generate, our technology generates about at 30 frames a second, about 50 or 60 variables, right? And that's overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
right? So a big part of what we do is distilling all of that information to the top highlights. Like, what is the key nuggets of data? And it's actually non-trivial, to your point. It is really a hard part of the problem. And how do you visualize it? Do you want to show me a real-time
And
graph
who
or?
prioritizes it? Is it going to be like a dumber AI, or is there going to be like a third-party human?
Yeah, that too. Like, when in our automotive work, that actually comes up a lot, right? Like when we're working with car companies or even social robotic companies, and we give them this data feed, they're like, "Whoa, like, what do we do with this? Like, tell us what values to look at." And there's various ways you can do this with thresholding and whatnot, but also reinforcement learning is another approach that automates some of that feedback loop around what data matters the most. So it's an unsolved problem, but it's a really fascinating one.
Yeah. Yeah, this problem of bias is a very important one because it leaks into ethics and morality as well. And then what kind of ethics and morality? Because the kind of ethics and morality that we're dealing with here in the United States, even here, it's not unified, right? You can go from community to community. They have their own priorities, but it's drastically different when we go to Egypt, where you're from, or Iran, where I'm from. And I just don't know. Is there any?
Hang on, do you mind if
No,
I?
no, no, absolutely.
Can you open the lights? Like we have a sudden thunderstorm here, so
Oh.
like it's just bizarre.
Yeah, so I can't record right now because it's pouring.
Yeah.
And you can hear it in the sunroom.
Yeah, can you hear the pouring in our recording?
No,
by
not
the way?
really. No.
Okay, so we're good. Okay,
Okay, perfect.
bye. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
here weather is kind of weird too. We're in South Florida. It's just a strange year.
Yeah, exactly. Like, right, just a thunderstorm. In the big scheme of things, it's fine. So I apologize for interrupting.
No, it's
but
all good.
yeah.
Have you come across any kind of this? I don't know where your technology is being used. Is it mainly United States or globally? But have you come across this difference between priorities with respect to ethics and morality based on social values and cultural values?
Yes, we have. So our technology is deployed in 90 countries around the world. And I'm involved with the World Economic Forum. So I'm a young global leader, and I sat on the Global Future Council for Robotics and AI for a number of years. It was a very international council. And I was just fascinated by how different countries have different values around ethics and AI and privacy and all of these considerations. So, for example, our biggest competitor is a Chinese company, and they have access to a ton of data and a ton of funding, and they're very aligned with their government. And a lot of this is about access to data, as you know, right? Especially in this AI and technology space. So, I think it's really interesting. We have very strong core values, and we've decided to take a particular path and be advocates for what we believe is ethical AI. But I recognize that it's not universal. What we have found, though, is that like-minded businesses select us, right? Because they too care about ethics, and they want to be seen as the kind of the ethics-friendly company to partner with. That's been really true for car companies in particular. So I don't know. I'm hopeful that, again, one reason why we need consumers to really be educated about this is then consumers can have a strong voice and say, I'm going to buy technology from this company because they're ethical, but not this other company because they don't meet kind of the ethics standards.
Yeah, also keeping big tech companies responsible for
Correct.
working with systems that are not necessarily ethical, right? Because it's interesting you mentioned the Chinese company, because now it's a huge contrast between Western approach and the Chinese approach, and then how the business interest sometimes can jeopardize the ethical and the Western value kind of an approach, and how we're going to move forward. As you said, companies with more access to data will have a far greater chance of dominating, because that's why wouldn't you? If you have a good technology, why wouldn't you want to dominate? So it seems like
One other thing that you also brought up that is really important is bias,
Yeah.
especially in our space, and you may have seen that in the news over the past 18 months or so. Some facial recognition systems have been kind of criticized for discriminating or not being accurate or being biased against certain subpopulations, including women of color. Right. And the reason this is the case, if you look closely at it, is because the training data is very homogeneous. It's usually middle-aged white guys. Right.
Why is that?
Well, because that data seems to be the most readily accessible. I mean, we at Affectiva, I have this kind of anecdote, where we work with a lot of the car companies around the world, and this one particular global brand, it's a global automaker, luxury automaker, and they based in Europe, and they wanted to test the accuracy of our algorithm. So that they sent us a data set, and we looked at the data set, and it was literally like, East European, middle-aged, blue-eyed, blonde guys, right? And we could have totally tested this data set, probably done great, and sent it back to the car company and moved on. But we had an internal meeting and we said, that's just not right. This is a global car company. It's almost our social and moral responsibility to flag that to them and educate them, right? And so we sent back a report. We said, okay, we really recommend that we go back out and collect a more diverse data set with different ethnicities, different genders, different age ranges, even, people wearing glasses or having beards like you do, right? Like there were very few people who looked like you in that data set. And that's really important. So we did that. And I think that built a lot of credibility with that car company. But it just made me realize that, and it was unintended, right? It's not like they did that on purpose. They just didn't think that the diversity of the data is important. And it's so key. And that's where the diversity of the team becomes even like really critical, because we're such a diverse team. We were able to say, hang on a second, nobody looks like me in this data set. Right? That's not cool. So I think bias is to me, actually, it's the number one biggest area for concern I have around these technologies, because if we're not careful, we can just perpetuate all of the biases that exist in society and just kind of replicate them at scale.
But bias can also be reversed, right? In the sense that, hey, we want to focus on diversity. Therefore, we don't care how good you are as a white team or a white CEO. We just want to replace you with like a brown person or a black person, right? Because that's also a problem. It's a very human thing that we say, hey, we want to fix some problem and let's just destroy all the structure that we already have. We don't even care how well it's working. So
yeah. I mean, humans are very biased, and we're not necessarily always objective. And I think technology can bring a little bit more objectivity into this. I mean, hiring is another area where humans are really biased, and technology can help reduce that bias, but we have to be careful about how we use it.
You mentioned about facial recognition, the news came out last night that Amazon bans police use of facial recognition technology for 1 year. And I noticed in this article that on Monday, IBM said it was getting out of the facial recognition business altogether. So it's a very big deal what is happening with respect to facial recognition. And I also want to mention to our audience, this is actually from MIT Technology Review, that China has started a grand experiment in AI education. It could reshape how the world learns. And it's also very interesting with what you're doing, how the Chinese classrooms, they're using machines and headbands and different kind of sensors to measure basically how focused you are as a student, how, with facial expressions and all of that. So have you guys worked in any capacity in education area as well?
We have not. It's not been an area of focus, but it's one that I'm actually really passionate about. And I know that's where how you design the system and how you think about the user experience becomes really important. I don't know exactly how this Chinese company
Let me read this very small segment. These days, many students at Jinhua Jiaxun Primary School in eastern China begin their lessons not by opening textbooks, but by putting on headbands. The headbands developed by startup BrainCo Incorporated of Somerville, Massachusetts, where you are, use 3 electrodes, 1 on the forehead and 2 behind the ears, to detect electrical activity in the brain, sending the data to a teacher's computer. Software generates real-time alerts about students' attention levels and gives an analysis at the end of each class. Obviously, it's not going to be limited to only this kind of data and this kind of an approach, but it gives us an idea that basically the A in AI, which I've been arguing for this for a long time, instead of thinking of it as artificial intelligence, it is being seen as augmented intelligence, that you have a very powerful and reliable assistant that does something that you can't even imagine. Like what you said, the amount of information that your system generates, 50 or 60 every second, is just unimaginable for any human to be able to do that. But it has direct and real life consequences and positive consequences for students who can learn better. And it just seems like a really cool thing, but at the same time, it comes with all the negative things because it's a tool. It's a double-edged sword that you can use it in any kind of a direction.
Right. And you can use exactly. And it's the way you design it. If the teacher is going to use this data to reprimand students and like really punish students for not paying attention, then I'm not sure. However, if the teacher is going to use the exact same data to identify that, Joe, or not, that's not a Chinese name, but like, a particular kid is really not engaged in this class, and he or she, the teacher, can really focus on that student to personalize the learning experience, I'm all for that, right? And especially, again, I've been watching both my kids learn online over the last few months. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Because class, the teacher can really gauge the level of interest and engagement, and it can, she or he can adapt the learning experience. Online, it's so hard to do that. If you are, if you're in a Zoom classroom, it's really hard to assess level of engagement. Even worse, if you're doing asynchronous learning, where you are just watching some video content and learning math online. Well, imagine if that learning experience, there was a little chatbot that was monitoring your level of engagement and could notice, for instance, that my 11-year-old son was really fidgeting or losing interest or super confused or frustrated, then it could interject the way an amazing teacher would. So I think there's really incredible opportunities to democratize access to online learning in particular. I grew up in the Middle East. I was lucky that I had access to amazing schools, but most people there don't have that. Not just there, all around the world. And I think technology can really, if you've got intelligent, emotionally intelligent learning systems, I think that could really be powerful in terms of engaging students and increasing learning outcomes.
Yeah, and on the personal basis, like one-on-one basis, right? Because like what you were saying, I also went to school in Iran, and my elementary school, we were 50 people in one class.
Right.
Right. And
right.
They just dump something that they decided that, hey, this will work kind of for general people because of the jobs that we need, and screw the individual capabilities and abilities and interests of these kids. And here, even though it's like night and day, but it's not really that different because you still rely on the perspective and the experience and, again, bias of that individual teacher who has to take care of maybe 20 students. And right. She's like, well, this is how I've been doing it for the past 40 years. Why do I need to change it?
Right, exactly. And we have an opportunity with technology to augment. I'm not saying we're going to replace teachers, but to your point about augmentation, augment teachers with new data and with new tools that could help with this personalization. I think that could be really powerful. But yeah, it has to be designed in the right way. It's not about Big Brother, right? We're now going to survey all these kids and punish them. If it's that, then I'm totally against it.
Which could totally be that, right? We gotta talk about it because Correct. It can be awesome, or it can be what you mentioned with respect to my beard, and what we talked about prioritizing this ocean of data to highlights Well, if there is somebody who's not careful, they can look at me and like, hey, we have in our data that's been prioritized by us that terrorists usually have this kind of a beard. So maybe this guy is a terrorist. We're just going to put it here and, it's out of my control.
Like you're screwed, right?
Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah. No, I know.
Like it's serious. Well, I got
It
to...
is serious, actually. Yes.
Yeah. One of the topics that we talked about is any technology works as well as a society that adopts that technology. How do you see this process of adopting to technology done here in the Western society and in a society like in Egypt or in the Middle East?
I think this is where advocating for the thoughtful kind of what we call thoughtful regulation of this technology becomes really key. I do think there's a role for regulation here. I don't think it should just be kept up to the individual companies or individual founders like me. I'm part of an organization called the Partnership on AI Consortium. It was started by all the tech giants, and now, as well as Amnesty International and ACLU. And now they have companies like Affectiva part of it too. And the idea is we come together and we're trying to kind of build what is fair, accountable, and transparent and ethical AI, and develop these best practices and work with other organizations to implement them, including legislation as well. So I really think there needs to be a lot more conversation and a lot more work to be done. Now, regarding how it's used in say, the US versus a country like Egypt, these are very, there's cross-cultural differences in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Again, we've deployed our technology in 90 countries around the world. We always ask for opt-in, and we found that some countries, the opt-in rates are really high. And in some other countries, the opt-in rates are really low. Like Germany is our lowest opt-in rate.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Where is the highest?
I honestly don't know. I don't know where the highest is. I'm not sure. But like they're kind of all hovering kind of around 80-90%, and Germany is at about 60%.
Wow.
So there's a lot more mistrust of I don't know if it's mistrust of tech companies. I don't know if it's, not wanting to turn the camera on. I don't know, but I thought that was really interesting.
We had a really interesting experience with Google Glass when it came out, and the way that it came out, we've been talking about that too, that you couldn't even buy it. It had to be given to you if you were selected, and people didn't react to it that well. Some of the people who were wearing Google Glass, they were being attacked by people, which part of it is because of privacy, but the other part is, hey, you're not human anymore. You think you're better than us, basically, right? So that's what I mean by social adoption. Because, for example, when you look at Japan, the social adoption of technology there has been done very organically. You go to a temple, there is a robot priest that you can go and talk to, and it's like, well, that's how it is. But there's a disconnect here, right? Some of it comes, I guess, from religious aspect of things that, if you're a Christian, you say, hey, if you use a chip, for example, in your brain, that's mark of the beast and whatever. I'm not saying right or wrong or whatever. I think people should believe in whatever they want to believe, but there will be a point that obviously you're going to be an empowered human being if you're using these kind of technologies, and people who are not using them will be falling behind. This is just, this is the bottom line.
Yeah, correct. Actually, on this Google Glass example, we're now partnered with a company called BrainPower. And they use Google Glass and our technology as an augmentation tool for kids on the autism spectrum. So they've deployed about 400 of these around the US, in US schools and homes. And we're already seeing that a lot of these kids, they're improving in terms of eye and like reading nonverbal communication. The question is, what happens when you take away the glasses? Does the learning persist? So again, it's an example of a tool where, if it's deployed in the right way, it can be really helpful. But you do have to consider all of these social factors. I mean, when I started doing research in this area like 20 years ago, when we, remember the days when we had like big, rounded, blurry webcams?
Yeah.
there was zero acceptance of cameras, right? Like they weren't ubiquitous. We didn't really have a use case for them. And now cameras are everywhere. Like they're just part and parcel of our societal fabric, the selfie movement, right? And I think that all this social acceptance has to be part of the equation. You're absolutely right. And again, very different across cultures.
Yeah. Just educating the people, I guess, to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Right? Because people are resistant at first, but when they feel like they're being left behind, they rush to stores to buy whatever it is that they want to buy. They use it, but they end up using it without really knowing why they're using it for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You are a very impressive human being because you're in your early 40s, if I'm not mistaken, and you're coming from a society that is very close with respect to women, the entire Middle East, really. And you're one of the very few people, I would say, relatively speaking, who's the leader of this new wave of artificial intelligence being built. How would other girls and women can follow your footsteps? And also, I'm interested to know how many other women, relatively speaking, are in the position where you are in the field of artificial intelligence right now.
Yeah, so I'll start by answering that question. I mean, there's very few. The answer is very few, and we need a lot more. So the intersection of kind of women-led AI company, women and AI company and entrepreneur, it's like really tiny. The Venn diagram is really tiny. So I think we definitely need more women in leadership across the board, but especially in AI. Now add to that the complexity that I am from the Middle East. I have been, again, so lucky that my parents supported my and my two sisters' education. I really owe everything to that, and I try to pay it forward with my kids, for example. I really do believe in the power of education. It's transformative. But I also think that there are, I grew up in a family that supported my education, but still had very strict gender roles, and I had to really navigate that, right? Like there was a lot of tensions throughout my career between my role as, my professional role and my aspirations, and then my role as a mother and a wife. I'm now a divorcee, so that didn't work out, right? So I had to really struggle with that. My advice to young, not just young, but my advice to women out there who are trying to figure that out is just really kind of, I don't know, for me, it was really about learning to believe in myself. I have so much inner doubt. It's not even funny, right? Like I'm always doubting myself. And it's because of these deep cultural things that are ingrained in my brain that basically say, oh, you can't be a CEO. Oh, no, you can't go out and raise money like that. It's not going to work, right? Like all the time, this voice in my head is just putting me down. You can't write a book. Nobody's going to read it, right? Well, guess what? People are actually reading the book, right? So I've had to learn to negotiate with that inner voice in my head. And it has stopped me a few times in my career, for sure.
Yeah, facing your fear is a very good step. Joseph Campbell has a quote saying, the cave you're most afraid of has a treasure that you seek.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to write that.
Yeah, it's really good. Well, please look it up, but I'm pretty sure that it's Joseph Campbell about the cave and the treasure. And
Cool.
I keep saying it to my friends that whatever that you're afraid of the most, that's the indicator that that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing, because the voice in here, that's not necessarily your friend.
There's actually one of the books I really like is called Run to the Roar. It's by a professional coach, squash coach called Paul Asante. And he talks about how you really need to just face if there's something you're afraid of, take it on. And I kind of like that.
Yeah, and also that kind of a fear that, you understand that because you're also from that region, that we are born into the pool of stuff that has been already determined and decided for us. And, I always say I was 1 second old. I was labeled as a Shia Muslim straight male Iranian. And good luck changing any of them. Right?
Right.
The entire society and civilization will come after you if you decide to change any of them. But when you go through with it, you realize that, hey, I'm on my own. I have my, my priorities, a decision that I can make. So it's also very interesting to me how machine emotions and emotional analysis, empowered by technology, is going to separate things that we are carrying emotionally but are not useful or productive for us.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Because I don't know. My view is that it's not just my view, but we know that emotions cut across every aspect of our lives, right? Like
Yeah.
the way we make decisions, our health, our memories, which is an area I'm really fascinated by. And I just wonder, once we're able to decode our emotions and quantify them, how can we apply them in a way that augments our intelligence and gives us these superpowers, right? Across the board. And I don't know. Like it's very new territory, right? Like we still need to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. I never thought about it before saying it, but this is interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Never heard it framed that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm think about that.
Well, you see, that's one of the reasons I don't write down questions, and I lose a lot of guests because of that. Because they're like, well, send us some of the questions you want to ask, because they want to be in comfort zone and safe territories. But I'm like, I just don't like to do it because, we have this exchange and something emerges that I haven't even thought about. That's the most interesting part of all of this for me.
Yeah, that is like really interesting. Like this kind of palette of emotions, like which of those are relevant and which of those are, we'll be able to measure them, but maybe it's useless. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in this field, because it's so new, people are fixated on a small subset of emotions, right? Like joy, surprise, anger, fear. And I'm just interested in the less celebrated states, like the state of wonder. Like, what do people look like when they are in awe of each other, right? Or when they're inspired. When you watch a TED Talk and you're inspired, what does your face look like? We don't know. We probably can collect the data. And so it's things like that. I think there's just so much to discover about how humans communicate. And I find that just really fascinating and exciting.
Hey, I should also ask you, we are going through a secondary psychedelic revolution after the 60s. They are making a comeback. They have significant amount of benefits for soldiers who are coming back with PTSD, for depression, and also for individuals to expand their mind if they decide to experiment with, whether it's LSD or psychedelic mushrooms. Have you thought about studying that area? Because emotions are a huge part of, you're an individual who've never experienced psychedelics. You take 2 grams of magic mushrooms, or psychedelic mushrooms, and you are experiencing a world that you did not even know existed. And you're experiencing it right here and right now.
The short answer is nope, we have not. We have, not us, but there has been a little bit of work done with PTSD patients, but it's more around in the context of psychiatry and the clinical kind of interviewing of PTSD patients, where this particular study at USC found that these patients were more forthcoming and open with a virtual agent than they were with a real human doctor, because they judged the doctor to be more judgmental of them. So that's very different than what you're saying, but that's the only kind of example where I've seen emotion AI kind of studied in that context. But that's also really fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's coming because
I also haven't experienced it myself, so I'm like, ooh.
Oh, you haven't? You haven't?
No,
okay.
I've not.
Well, I tell you, I started experimenting when I was 25 because, I grew up in Iran, and the worst thing for my mom was you do drugs, and it was just,
That's what I tell my kids, by the way. Yeah.
Blanket statement drugs, and obviously there are some of them that are really, really bad, but certain psychedelics literally saved my life, because I went through a period of depression, guilt and shame. Hey, why did you leave your mom and all of that? And I started going see a psychologist, psychotherapist, whatever. And after the second session, I was like, well, how long would it take for me to describe who I am to this person? This is never going to work out for me.
Right.
And this was like more than 10 years ago. But it's becoming legal, right? So they legalize it in Denver. There's a place, MAPS, a Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. They've been pushing for legalizing MDMA for PTSD and depression, and they're looking to 2022 for a FDA approval and all that. And I think these two can go together unbelievably well, because there are a lot of unknown aspects of this experience that, when quantified, a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting unknowns can emerge as a result of it.
Yeah, new territory, huh?
What a fascinating world it is we're living in.
Very.
How do you see the world change in the next 10 years, just for fun?
Oh, goodness. Well, can I even think about what's going to happen next week, right?
But there's a bigger general trend, right?
Yeah. I really believe that the de facto human-machine interface is going to mirror the de facto human-to-human interface. So the way we interact with machines will just be the way we interact with one another, through conversation, through perception, and through empathy. And I believe that will not only transform human-machine interactions, but it will fundamentally really connect us better with it'll fundamentally change human to human communication as well. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, the book is called Girl Decoded: The Scientist's Quest to Reclaim Our Humanity by Bringing Emotional Intelligence to Technology. What is next for you, and where can our audience follow your work and future endeavors?
So I am very easy to find on social media. I've been doing a lot of live streams on LinkedIn and, Facebook and other platforms. So please follow me there. For Affectiva, I'm just really heads down trying to bring our technology to the world, and especially in automotive. So in the next few years, your cars might have emotion AI enabled capabilities, which is very exciting. And then for me personally, I've realized with this book, it's the beginning of a journey. I don't know what the journey is, but my gut and my instinct, just by seeing how people are reacting to the book, is that it's the beginning of a new conversation and new connections. So, I'm kind of embarking on this new journey, not knowing where it's going to lead me, but I'm excited about it.
This is your first book, right?
It's my first book.
Yeah, that's awesome. You obviously are a very capable and reliable kind of a leader, because you have perspective, right? You didn't come out of just, a comfortable kind of a situation. You struggled, and you've, thought a lot about this. So I'm very happy that we had this conversation. I was excited. I don't usually get excited talking to new people, but it's for the good reason.
This was great. So much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you the last question that I ask all my guests, that if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say the worst thing humanity has done, and what would you say is their greatest achievement?
The worst thing humanity has done is just this dehumanizing of each other. Like we live in this empathy crisis where, for some reason, we've just dehumanized each other. We don't think of, we've detached from these people in this other country, or these people who live in the middle of the United States. We've just dehumanized, and it's led to this very polarized world. I'm hoping this pandemic will fix some of that. So I think that's kind of the worst thing we've done, maybe, because it has a lot of implications on what we build and how we use technology against each other. So that's that. Best thing we've done? What is the best thing we've done? I don't know. That's a tough question. I think actually I'm a huge traveler. It's part of who we are as a family. And the ability to visit other cultures and other countries, and for me to grow up in the Middle East and then be able to end up in this country, and I think that's really powerful. So this kind of cross-border ability to travel and explore. The ability to travel and explore, I think, would be the best thing we have figured out as humans.